Imagine living in a society where everything runs with near-cold precision. Cities are spotless. Traffic is disciplined. Laws are clear down to the smallest detail. Yet inside this system that seems rigid and mechanical, there are choices that leave outsiders genuinely surprised. Parks in the heart of the city where people sunbathe like they're at the beach. Red light districts that are legal and regulated like any other profession. Public referendums that decide the fate of entire flocks of pigeons. Highways with no speed limit. As long as you are responsible enough to control yourself. This is Germany, one of the strongest economies in the world, where order is not a slogan but a habit deeply woven into daily life. But what makes many Americans pause is not the wealth or the discipline. It is how this society defines freedom. In Germany, freedom does not mean doing whatever you want. It means having the right to choose within a very clear framework, where every individual is directly responsible for the consequences of their actions. That is why things that seem contradictory can exist side by side. A strict society that allows very open spaces. A country famous for tough laws, yet willing to legalize things others prefer to avoid. A system that can feel impersonal, but spends enormous effort managing human life in a way that minimizes risk. The story of Germany is not about who is right or who is wrong, it is a story about the price of order, and how far a society is willing to go to keep its machine running. To understand why Germany can maintain a level of discipline that many people both admire and feel pressured by, you have to look back at how this country was rebuilt after the great collapses of the 20th century. Germany did not become what it is today by luck. It became this way because it experienced failures painful enough to force an entire society to change at its core. After the war, Germany faced a question of survival. How do you rebuild a nation that has been devastated, has lost trust from the outside, and is fractured from within? Their answer was not emotion or slogans. It was systems. Every process was standardized. Every rule was written to prevent old mistakes from happening again. In that context, order was not a preference. It was a condition for survival. Over time, this way of thinking sank deep into everyday life. In Germany, the law is not something to test or push against. It is something to rely on. When you stop at a red light on an empty street, it is not because you are afraid of a fine. It is because you trust that everyone else will do the same when it is their turn. That trust allows society to run smoothly without constant force. It also explains why Germans accept rules so detailed that outsiders often find them irritating. Germany's wealth did not come from short-term booms. It came from steady, long-term productivity. Industry, engineering, and vocational training are valued as highly as university education. A skilled craftsman is respected just as much as a manager. This creates a highly trained workforce that is connected to the system and less likely to be pulled into extreme instability. When an economy depends on precision and reliability, society has no choice but to value discipline. Within that foundation, freedom in Germany is understood very differently. Freedom does not mean breaking the rules. It means knowing exactly how far the rules allow you to go. You can bike across the city because the infrastructure is built for it. You can drink beer in public because society trusts that you know your limit. You can drive very fast on the autobahn, but only if you are sober, focused, and respectful of others. Freedom here always comes with responsibility. This feels both familiar and strange to many Americans. Familiar because personal responsibility is also a core American value. Strange because in Germany, responsibility is not just a personal ethic, it is a social expectation. When you break the rules, you are not only fined, you are seen as someone who has broken a shared agreement. That pressure does not need to be spoken. It is strong enough to keep people in line. This control shows up not only in traffic or at work, but in how cities function. Recycling systems, bottle deposits, and waste separation are not public campaigns. They are habits. People follow them because they understand that if they do not, the system becomes inefficient and the cost comes back to them. This is a very practical kind of discipline. It is not romantic, but it works. Still, living in such a society requires accepting real trade-offs. Life in Germany is not cheap. Processes can be slow and rigid. Strong privacy norms make it harder to form quick friendships. Public emotional expression is limited, especially for those used to more open and expressive cultures. This is the price of a society that chooses stability over spontaneity. That is why many people are genuinely surprised by Germany's more relaxed sides. Parks where people comfortably sunbathe. Red light districts that are legal and regulated. Strange festivals and unusual competitions. These do not contradict discipline. They exist as pressure valves, necessary releases so a highly structured society does not become so tense that it damages itself. Understanding this foundation allows us to see Germany more clearly. This is not a cold or rigid country because it lacks emotion. It is a society that learned to control emotion to avoid repeating the disasters of its past. And from that foundation, the things that make outsiders both curious and confused begin to make sense, not as rebellion, but as carefully calculated parts of a much larger system. Once you understand Germany's foundation of discipline and systems thinking, the images that once seemed contradictory begin to make sense. This is a place where order does not erase freedom, it shapes how freedom is allowed to exist. And within that tightly controlled space, Germans permit open zones that many other societies would never dare to touch. A clear example is how German cities use public space. In many places, parks are not just for walking or exercise. On sunny days, you will see people stretched out on the grass, sunbathing in minimal clothing, sometimes barely aware of who is watching. For outsiders, especially Americans from societies still deeply conflicted about the body and social norms, this can be shocking. But in Germany, it is not provocation. It comes from a clear belief that the human body is not something that must be controlled through shame. What matters is that this openness does not exist in chaos. It happens inside spaces that society has quietly agreed on. A park is a park. A street is a street. Where something is allowed and where it is not is clearly defined. Because those boundaries are respected, freedom within them feels safe. Germans do not need police standing nearby to watch them. They regulate themselves through norms that are deeply internalized. The same logic applies to nightlife. Red light districts in Germany do not exist in a legal gray zone. They are legalized, regulated, and taxed like any other industry. In many societies, this is a deeply divisive topic. But for Germans, the reasoning is practical. What cannot be eliminated entirely must be brought into the system to reduce harm. When activity is open, health, safety, and rights can be protected more effectively. This reflects a deeper philosophy. Germany does not believe in pretending human desires do not exist. Instead, it tries to manage them through law and responsibility. The system's strictness is not meant to suppress, but to prevent society from sliding into extremes. That is why things that sound permissive are often surrounded by layers of regulation. On the other side, there are moments when Germany clearly places collective interest above individual emotion. Debates over urban environmental issues, such as controlling pigeon populations in certain cities, are a telling example. When numbers grew beyond control and began to harm health and infrastructure, citizens voted for decisive action. For many Americans, this feels morally shocking. For Germans, it is seen as a management problem. If nothing is done, the damage spreads and affects everyone. Decisions like this reveal how German society works. Democracy is not just the right to express feelings. It is the responsibility to accept the outcome of collective choices, even when those outcomes are uncomfortable. This directness can feel cold, but it creates a level of consistency that is rare. The deepest tension in Germany's idea of freedom appears on its famous highways. The Autobahn, with sections that have no speed limit, is often described as a symbol of personal freedom. In reality, it is not a place where anything goes. It demands high driving skill, strict discipline, and absolute respect for others. Lanes are used precisely. Emergency lanes form almost instinctively during accidents. Speed freedom exists only because there is trust that most drivers are responsible enough not to turn it into disaster. For American audiences, this is the key to understanding Germany. Freedom here is not looseness. It is a reward given to a society that has proven it can control itself. When the system trusts you, you are given more room. When you break that trust, society responds quickly and firmly. What looked like disconnected parts of life, parks, red light districts, controversial votes, the Autobahn, all circle around the same question. How do you allow people to live true to human instincts without breaking the shared order? Germany does not offer a perfect answer, but it offers a very clear one. Freedom is not free. It must be paid for with discipline, responsibility, and the acceptance that not every collective choice will make everyone happy. When you look more deeply at how German society actually works, what begins to appear is not just discipline or freedom within limits, but a quiet tension that outsiders rarely notice. It is the price of living inside a system that works almost too well. When everything runs smoothly, precisely, and predictably, people are pulled into that rhythm, sometimes to the point of forgetting how tightly wound they have become. In Germany, expectations are clear. You know what you are supposed to do, when to do it, and how to do it. This prevents chaos, but it also creates constant pressure to be correct and efficient. Small mistakes are not easily brushed aside. Being late is not just being late, it is breaking trust. Ignoring a procedure is not a personal choice, it affects the entire system. No one needs to scold you. The pressure lives in the silence and in the looks of the people around you. That is exactly why Germany also needs release valves. Strange festivals, absurd competitions, shocking foods, and unusual traditions are not deviations from the norm. They are safety mechanisms. When daily life is tightly framed by rules and high expectations, society has to create spaces where people are allowed to loosen up, without breaking the shared order. Beer festivals, bizarre contests about beards or noses, extreme folk games, these are not just entertainment. They allow Germans to step out of the role of the model citizen for a short time. In those moments, they are allowed to be louder, messier, and less perfect. What matters is that these moments are limited in time and place. When the festival ends, order returns almost immediately. This is a major difference from many other societies. In Germany, rebellion does not spill over or linger. It is permitted as part of the system, not as a challenge to the system. That allows pressure to be released without sacrificing long-term stability. For American audiences, where protest and self-expression often carry strong political or identity-driven meaning, this approach feels unfamiliar, but deeply thought-provoking. The cost of stability goes beyond psychology. High living costs, especially in major cities, make it difficult for young people and immigrants to fully settle in. Housing markets are competitive. Bureaucracy is heavy. Social expectations are high. Germany welcomes international workers, but belonging is not automatic. Society accepts you if you understand and follow the rules. If you don't, the feeling of exclusion can come quickly. Another rarely discussed aspect is emotional distance in everyday interaction. Germans are often labeled as cold or unfriendly. In reality, this reflects respect for personal space and communication efficiency. But for people from emotionally expressive cultures, this quietness can feel isolating. You can live in a crowded city and still feel alone, standing just outside the circle of connection. All of this forms the shadow side of a well-functioning society. Little chaos, but little room to fully relax. Strong stability, but constant adaptation. Germany does not hide this reality. It does not market itself as an emotional paradise. It offers reliability instead. And for many people, that reliability is worth more than short-term comfort. When you see this price clearly, the story of Germany becomes complete. This is not a perfect society. It is a society that made very clear priorities. It accepts tension to avoid chaos. It accepts tense rules to achieve stability. And it accepts that not everyone is suited for this rhythm of life. For American audiences, the real question is not whether Germany is better or worse. The question is how much discipline and pressure you are willing to accept in exchange for order and safety in your own society. Germany shows that freedom and stability are not opposites, but balancing them always demands hard choices. And in the end, every society must decide how much it is willing to pay for the machine it wants to keep running. As the story of Germany reaches its final chapter, What remains is not shock value or strange details to retell for entertainment. What remains is a much larger question about how a society chooses to live with its own contradictions. Germany does not hide those contradictions. On the contrary, it builds an entire system to manage them, accept them, and keep them from slipping out of control. Germany understands very clearly that order does not exist by default. It is to be maintained every day through laws, habits, and social consensus. But Germany also understands that humans are not machines. If people are forced to live too long inside rigid structures, pressure builds up and eventually breaks out in unpredictable ways. That is why German society allows buffer zones, spaces where people are allowed to be different, unusual, even controversial, as long as they do not damage the shared foundation. That is why the things outsiders often see as contradictions are actually essential parts of the system. Legalized nightlife is not meant to promote excess, but to manage risk. Open and relaxed parks are not signs of chaos, but the result of trust that people can regulate themselves inside clearly defined spaces. Speed unlimited sections of the Autobahn are not collective recklessness, but reward given to a society that has proven its discipline and responsibility. From an American perspective, where freedom is often linked to reducing government involvement, this approach can feel confusing. In Germany, freedom does not come from having fewer laws. It comes from laws being followed so consistently that people no longer have to worry about disorder around them. When you trust that others will do their part, you feel safe enough to enjoy your own freedom within the framework. The cost of this model, however, is very real. Life in Germany demands patience, adaptability, and a willingness to be judged by shared standards. Not everyone feels comfortable in a society where everything follows a process, where personal flexibility is limited by collective priorities. For those used to spontaneous, emotionally expressive environments, Germany can feel cold and distant, yet that surface-level coldness is precisely what allows the system to last. Germany does not promise explosive happiness or romantic dreams. It promises reliability. You may not fall in love with this society right away, but you know you can depend on it. And in a world that feels increasingly unpredictable, reliability has become a new form of luxury. It is also important to recognize that Germany is not a model to be copied exactly. This system was built from a very specific history, shaped by painful lessons and a culture that values collective responsibility. Transplanting it wholesale into another society, with different psychology and expectations, could easily backfire. But ignoring what Germany has achieved also means missing a valuable perspective. In the end, the story of Germany is not about wealth or discipline. It is a story about choice. A society choosing order over chaos, management over denial, and confronting human instincts through rules rather than pretending those instincts do not exist. These choices do not make everyone happy, but they create a stable foundation that allows society to keep functioning. And when you place that story next to what is happening in many other parts of the world today, the final question is not whether Germany is right or wrong. The real question is what you expect from the society you live in. How much freedom do you want? And how many rules are you willing to accept in exchange for safety and stability? Germany does not answer that question for you, but it shows very clearly what happens when a society decides to pay the price for order, and stays committed to that choice across generations. As the story of Germany comes to a close, what should remain is not surprise at its oddities, but a deeper reflection on how this society sees itself. Germany does not try to be likable to outsiders. It does not build its identity on emotion or spectacle. What it pursues is the long-term ability of the system to function, even if that makes individual life more demanding. In Germany's world, trust is the greatest asset. Trust that the law will be applied fairly. Trust that most people will do their part. And trust that if you follow the shared rules, the system will protect you when risk appears. That trust is what allows this society to grant individuals freedoms that, on the surface, seem to contradict its high level of discipline. Speed on the Autobahn, openness in public spaces, and a practical approach to sensitive issues all grow from this foundation. But trust does not exist by accident. It is built through millions of small actions repeated every day. Stopping at a red light even when no cars are coming. Sorting trash even when no one is watching. Accepting collective decisions even when you personally disagree. These actions do not create excitement, but they create a society that can be predicted. And in an unstable world, predictability becomes a form of psychological safety for American audiences, where energy, creativity, and resistance are often seen as engines of progress. Germany's story offers a sharp contrast. It raises the question of whether a society can move forward without constantly breaking its own framework. Germany's answer is yes, but at the cost of patience and a willingness to live within limits. Not everyone is willing to pay that price. And Germany does not expect everyone to fit. One important point must be made: the German model is not immune to change. Debates continue every day about the environment, immigration, personal freedom, and the role of the state. But how these debates are handled reveals the nature of the society. They are channeled into institutions, examined through data and process, rather than exploding into uncontrolled reactions. This makes change slower, but it also reduces the risk of collapse. That slowness is often criticized as rigidity. But when you look closer, it is caution earned through history. A society that has seen the devastating consequences of losing control will prioritize prevention over risk. Germany does not chase easy promises. It asks whether change can last for decades, not just for one political term. So the story of Germany is not a manual to copy, but a case study in social choice. It shows that no freedom exists in a vacuum. Every right is tied to responsibility, and every form of order depends on consent. When a society chooses stability, it designs everything around that goal, from infrastructure and laws to everyday behavior. When you finish this journey, the real question is not whether you like Germany or not. The question is what you expect from the society you live in. Do you want a place that allows unlimited experimentation, accepts high risk, and moves fast? Or a place that moves slower, feels safer, and brings fewer surprises? There is no single answer for everyone. Germany made its choice long ago and has stayed committed to it. Despite praise and criticism, it accepts that order may make life less exciting, but also more reliable. And in an era where uncertainty has become the norm, that reliability may be the greatest value a society can offer to the people who live within it.